to begin our new series for the year. If you were with us last year, we started out covering a few topics, and we started out with our conversation of just what is MAT, and our discussion is about stigma in the African American community. And we began our journey of education and enlightenment to talk about what is medical assisted treatment. We've covered addictions such as marijuana, alcohol, and we've also discussed prescription drugs and opiate use. And ending out our discussion in the year, we talked about dysfunction in the family. And that's where we're going to pick up our discussion today. Today, we have someone with us that is, personally speaking, I'm going to say I know him to be a man of integrity, a man of honor, and a wealth of knowledge. So I would like to take a moment and introduce him to you by reading his bio. We have before us today Pastor Eric J. Hollie. He is a licensed supervising independent social worker in the state of Ohio. He is also the founder and owner and lead therapist of Speak Life Counseling Services, LLC, which is located in the city of Springdale, Ohio. He has 25 years of social work and therapy experience with a variety of various populations. Pastor Hollie has earned his Bachelor's of Social Work degree from Capital University in Columbus, Ohio in 1997, and his Master's of Social Work degree from the University of Cincinnati in 2003. Mr. Hollie, or I should say Pastor Hollie, has worked with clients who are managing a variety of psychological, emotional, mental health, family, relationship, spiritual challenges and struggles, aiding them in learning how to best manage those struggles. He enjoys working with individuals, couples, and family. In his role as the pastor of New Jerusalem Apostolic Temple, located in the Cincinnati community of Oakley, Pastor Hollie also seeks to provide faith-based therapy services, helping clients understand that you can be saved and have a therapist. In addition, he is a certified cognitive processing therapist for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. Pastor Hollie uses a person-centered approach to therapy while also integrating cognitive behavior therapy principles of motivational interviewing and dialectical behavior therapy. In addition, he is adept in implementing biblical principles for those who are interested in faith-based counseling. His personal areas of interest include, but are not limited to, helping individuals cope with symptoms of PTSD, depression, anger, anxiety, men's issues, and general mental health concerns. It is my pleasure to introduce to you all Pastor Eric Hollie. Thank you for joining us, Pastor Hollie, and we look forward to the information you have to share on the stigma and the dysfunction in families. God bless you.
God bless you. Praise the Lord, Sister Kim. God bless you. Thank you so much for that warm welcoming greeting. It is certainly an honor and a privilege to be a part of this discussion tonight. And, really, whenever I get an opportunity to integrate therapy and faith, always jump, at that opportunity, because I think it's important that we continue to kind of tear down, those walls of stigma as it relates to mental health or mental illness, as it relates to substance abuse, because many people in the church, deal with those things. And so it's important that we talk about them. It's important that we expose them so that ultimately people can get help and be better. So I definitely appreciate the opportunity to share some information with you tonight. Amen.
I'm sorry, I muted myself. Thank you. Thank you so much. So tonight you are going to be sharing with us some information about the dysfunction in families and different roles that people have or play in the family. So
Okay. Definitely. So yes, Mom, I wanted to share some of the information, and I'll probably maybe cover a couple kind of specifically. I'll kind of go over all of those roles that sometimes family members take in relation to an individual dealing with addictions. I'll kind of cover those different roles, but then I'll focus on two, more specifically. So I think it's important to keep in mind, first of all, that when it comes to addiction, I think the first thing to keep in mind is the person who's addicted doesn't ride that roller coaster by themselves, right? I think that's important to keep in mind, that when it comes to a person who is dealing with an addiction, it is indeed a family disease. And I am of the belief that, when you look at it from a medical model perspective, I am of the belief that it is definitely a disease. And the reason why it's important to point that out is, if we don't look at it from that disease model, then we would, think that it's a character flaw, or that it's something, inherent with the person that they are or are not doing, or they don't have the willpower, or they're not praying hard enough, or they don't have the faith to get delivered. When you look at it from a disease model, it helps us to understand that when a person has an addiction, when they have a dependency, there are literally structures in the brain that change as a result of the addiction, right? And what starts out as a choice and what may start out as recreational use, once that addiction starts going, those receptors start firing, particularly those dopamine receptors. And before you know it, what starts out as a choice no longer is a choice, because structures in the brain have changed, and it has gone from use to abuse to dependency. And it cuts across every, facet of life. Doesn't matter if you're black and white or white. Doesn't matter if you're Asian or Latino. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. Doesn't matter if you are, quote unquote, in a ghetto, if you live on Nob Hill. Most people that are dealing with an addiction have the same behaviors. And that lets us know that it is a disease of the brain, and that you need treatment in order to successfully treat that disease, the disease of addiction. So I always like to point that out, on the outset. So again, when that person is going on this roller coaster of addiction, some studies suggest that it takes an individual 7 relapses in order to achieve sobriety. Well, the family is going on that roller coaster as well. And so it's important to remember that addiction is indeed a family disease. And here's another thing to keep in mind, and the effects addiction has on family members are significant and can cause severe dysfunction in how a family communicates and interacts with each other. And it's that dysfunction part that I think is important to keep in mind. Family members assume roles as it relates to the person with the addiction. And most of those roles, and all of those roles, can continue to enable the person to continue in their addiction. And sometimes family members may not even realize, that they are assuming these roles, but that's also at the heart of the dysfunction, because in a person in a family whose members are dealing with that person who has the addiction, they think that they're doing something pretty good, that they're trying to help the person, when in actuality they're not empowering them to really address their addiction. Unknowingly, they are enabling them to keep the addiction moving forward. And so I think that's important to keep in mind. So along with that, in order to cope with the unpredictable behaviors of the addict, and we know those behaviors, again, are unpredictable, each family member will adopt certain maladaptive patterns or certain negative patterns of coping and behavior in order to cope with the addict. And as I said before, family members are assuming these roles with the best of intentions, not realizing that they are actually contributing to the problem rather than helping solve the problem. So I think another thing to keep in mind is the behaviors that the family members are engaged in. Not only will they keep the person in their addiction, but kind of as a subset to it, these behaviors interfere with each family member's ability to lead a healthy and normal life. And I think that's the other problem, is so much attention is flooded to the person with the addiction that those family members who have assumed these roles, they lose their own identity. They lose their own sense of self. They lose their own ability to lead the kind of life that they want to lead, because so much attention and focus is driven to the person who has the addiction. So the person that has the addiction gets all of the love, all of the attention, all of the focus, at the expense of, people losing their own sense of self and their own sense of identity. So, of course, there's a word that, that goes along with that, and it's called codependence. That's kind of the, that's the word that comes with it. And so in most cases, if you are in a relationship or if you are with a loved one who is dealing with an addiction, chances are there is some level of codependency going on. And I think it's important to talk about that a little bit. One aspect I think that's important to realize is when we love somebody, it can certainly be hard to separate your desire to help and take care of them with their own responsibility to care for themselves. That line gets blurred. How much do I help them versus, them helping themselves? And sometimes we end up doing more, helping them at the expense of them helping themselves. And in actuality, it turns into enabling. So I wanted to point that out. So
Eric,
here's yes.
May I interrupt for a second? Because that was a
Sure.
good nugget. Can you repeat that again? That last part, please.
Yeah. So and I'm glad that you wanted to hear that again. So again, when you love someone, it can be hard to separate your desire to help and take care of them with their own responsibility to care for themselves. That line can often get blurred because our love for them and our concern for them will compel us to want to take care of them. And one of the hardest things to do is practice some tough love and help to hold them accountable for their part in their addiction and in their recovery. So that line oftentimes gets blurred. We want to help them, but if we help too much, it turns into enabling. But because the addict is very good at manipulation, when we try to put up barriers, or when we try to put up boundaries and parameters, the person with the addiction is very adept at manipulating, and they will make you feel that you are abandoning them, when in actuality, you're trying to put up boundaries, not only to protect yourself, but to allow them to take control of the things that they need to do in order to gain sobriety. And so that emotional manipulation is very strong. And again, it a lot of times causes us to respond to them by continuing to enable that behavior, because we get emotionally beat down and now we feel guilty, we feel ashamed, and before you know it, we're right back, in that enabling behavior.
Can I ask another question? There is a question in the chat that you may be addressing later on.
Okay.
But I want to present the question now. The question is, how does one deal with the tension and anger from confronting or addressing the issue of addictions?
Yeah. That's a good question, because at times we feel like we're walking on eggshells, and you're right, there is a lot of tension. I think one of the keys to doing that is, number one, we have to have some thick skin when we're confronting somebody with an addiction, because it will be easy for us to internalize what they are saying and start to feel, again, a sense of shame and a sense of guilt. Because remember, the person with the addiction, and I'm intentionally saying the person with the addiction, right, rather than the addict, because what we are trying to present is this is a part of who they are. It's not who they are, right? So the person with the addiction they've learned to develop a lot of manipulative skills, and they pull on those heartstrings. And if they can't get to you with loving words of affirmations and kindness, then it will turn to anger. And so we have to, once we understand that it is a reflection of what they are dealing with, that they are projecting onto you what they are dealing with. Once we recognize that, it will help us to focus on the disease and on the behavior, and not on what they are saying to us. So when we have to confront the tension that's in the room, when we have to confront the person with the addiction, we have to focus on the disease. We have to focus on, what's going on with the disease, and we have to be very careful to not take it personal. I think that's one of the things we can do.
That's good.
Hopefully that answered the question. Okay. Yeah. And that's a very good question. Very good question. And here's something that I also like to keep in mind, and I like to tell people, and I say this a lot to some of my clients in therapy: every behavior has meaning. Every behavior has meaning. So then the inverse of that becomes the question. And what I mean by that is, if every behavior has a meaning, we have to try to figure out the meaning behind the behavior, right? And so when it comes to dealing with a person with an addiction, oftentimes what they are projecting is a sign that something else is going on. If a person is being confronted with their addiction and we're trying to hold them accountable, well, if they are projecting, or if they're, angry, or they are shutting down, there's meaning behind that behavior. It could be fear. It could be their own guilt. It could be their own shame. It could be their own anger. And because those emotions and those feelings are hard to process and they are hard to accept, we would rather avoid. And one of the ways that people avoid is to project that onto other people, and they blame the other person. So when it comes to really confronting that person, being able to have that thick skin and not internalize what they are saying is very important. It's vital. So that was a really good question. Let me see, some other information that I wanted to share with you too is just in addition to that, some of that information on codependence. Another thing to keep in mind is this: codependent behavior is when a person seeks to meet the needs of another. That's part of codependency, when they seek to meet the needs of another. Codependency involving enabling the addicted person is often met with emotional fulfillment for one person and emotional one-sided abuse delivered by the other person. So oftentimes, the person who has the addiction, they are receiving the emotional support. They're receiving the love. They're receiving the affection. They're receiving the attention. On the flip side, the other codependent person, they're receiving all of the emotional abuse. They're the ones that we say this to sometimes individuals that have borderline personality disorder. They're the ones that say, I hate you, don't leave me. Like so that dichotomy kind of often presents itself. So the person who is giving all of the love and the attention and the affection is actually on the receiving end of a lot of verbal abuse, of a lot of emotional abuse, and then they feel guilty again if they are trying to set those boundaries and those parameters, because the person that is in active addiction, they are not ready to admit that they have an addiction. They're not ready to address it, And so it's important that, again, one codependent person is receiving love, affection. The other person is receiving a lot of emotional abuse as a result of that. So I think that's important to keep in mind. Here's another important piece with codependency. Whether it be love, time, or attention, we only have so much of ourselves to give in a day. Offering most of yourself to one person can cause resentment and conflicts with other members of your family. And that's the part I think that's important to keep in mind. And that is, all of the attention is going to the person with the addiction. And it often means that other members of the family are not receiving what they need. And as a result, those family members can start to act out. Those family members can start to engage in some negative behaviors, because bad attention is better than no attention. And I would rather get some attention than feel neglected, feel left out, and feel, on the outside looking in. So it's important that other members of the family continue to feel that love and that connection. But individuals that are dealing with codependency, it's important that there may be other things that are going on. Usually codependent individuals have some other things that has happened in their lives. Maybe a history of abuse, maybe a history of neglect, maybe their own type of trauma that makes it easy for them to be in that codependent relationship. So I think that's important to keep in mind. Most people that are codependent need their own therapy. Again, I'll say it again, every behavior has meaning. So therapy helps to uncover the meaning behind the behavior. What led you to engage in this codependent behavior? What was going on in your life that led to that? A lot of times therapy is needed. Here are some characteristics of codependent behavior. Then I'll get to those roles that families play. But here are some things to think about with codependent behavior. You feel personally responsible for others. That's one characteristic. Your own needs are less important and are not being met. Your feelings of worth and contribution are dependent on others. You're always at the mercy of someone else's drama or neediness. And another characteristic is you feel powerless even when you seem to be in control. Those are just some characteristics of a person who may have codependent behavior. So I want to, kind of share some of that. Now, part of what Sister Kim was talking about is, when people engage in addiction, again, family members assume, certain roles in order to, kind of keep the family going, or to make the family appear, to be better, than they are. Like these family members kind of take those roles. So here are some roles that individuals take, and I'll name them, but then I'll talk about two specifically. So some of the roles that family members play this from a dysfunctional place when it comes to dealing with somebody who has an addiction. Of course, the first one is the addict themselves. Consider them, the ringleader, because they are really driving all of this. It is their addiction that is causing these other family members to assume these dysfunctional roles. So you have the addict, which is, again, they're in the center of it. They're the ringleader, and they, or the puppeteer, and all these other members are playing their roles. So you have the addict. Then you have another role is caretaker. So you have the addict, you have the caretaker. The next role that people play or a person can play is the hero. Another role that somebody can play is the scapegoat. All right, so you have the addict, you have the caretaker, you have the hero, you have the scapegoat. Another role that people sometimes play is the mascot. And then the last one is the lost child. All right, so those are the 6 roles that family members play from a dysfunctional perspective whenever there's an addiction. Again, you have the addict, you have the caretaker, you have the hero, the scapegoat, the mascot, and the lost child. Now, for just for our session here, I'll focus on 2 because, in my opinion, they really are, interconnected, and that is the caretaker and the hero. I'll kind of focus, on those 2. So I want to read you information from both of those. So the first one, of course, is the caretaker. And the reason why I picked that one is because that one is the most important, and that one is the one that oftentimes has the most dysfunction in the family, along with the addict. So perhaps the most recognizable codependency role in a family that is struggling with addiction is the one of the caretaker. The caretaker is the person that has taken on the addict's responsibilities and problems and attempts to keep the family happy and in balance. Here's another important thing to remember about the caretaker. The caretaker shields the addict from the consequences of their addiction while also hiding family problems from friends and society. That's the caretaker's role. They're presenting the family as, the Joneses. We got it all together. We ain't got no problems. We ain't got no issues. Yeah, everything good over here. But at the same time, they're not allowing the person with the addiction to be held accountable and responsible for their addiction and for their behavior. They shield the addict from the consequences of their addiction. They try to get them, get them out of jail. They try to lessen the consequences. They give them money to keep the addiction going. So they try to shield that addict from accepting and really being held accountable for those behaviors and for the disease. So again, by taking on the addict's problems, the caretaker also becomes an enabler and readily offers solutions to the addict's problems that don't include having the addict face the consequences of their addiction. So and again, there's a pathology behind that. What is going on with that caretaker? In most cases, there's a sense of shame and guilt that comes with a person who has an addiction. Because of the stigma and the taboo with addiction, and because people don't often fully understand what addiction is. Again, people think that addiction is a character flaw, it's a character defect. Most times I hear is that it's a choice, and just because a person chose to, drink or smoke or shoot up, then they can choose not to. And those of us, in therapy or that have worked in addictions understand, again, that what starts off as a choice, when it turns into an addiction, it's no longer a choice. But because there's a lot of shame and a lot of guilt and a lot of stigma associated with addictions, family members do not want to acknowledge that a person has an addiction. And we know all of the different things, and all of the different words that come with that. They a wino, they a crackhead, they a chicken head, all kinds of things. And so that further keeps people in that shame and that guilt, and they really don't want to, quote unquote, expose the addiction. Now, from a spiritual perspective, the devil works on that. And the devil loves to keep us in shame and guilt. And if we can continue to feel that way, then we will, avoid dealing with it, because dealing with it sometimes is very painful. And if given the opportunity, and I say this to my clients a lot, we have that fight or flight response when things that are very anxiety provoking, when they come up on us, we can either flee or we can fight. Human nature tells us that if given the opportunity, when something is anxiety provoking, our natural tendency is to flee, which is to say we avoid. So we will avoid talking about it. We will avoid exposing it because we don't want to bring any shame and embarrassment to our family. So the caretaker doesn't, allow the person with the addiction to own what they are going through and get help, nor do they want other people in society or outside of the family to know that there's a chink in the armor in their family, because they want to give the perception that our family is okay and there's nothing wrong. Quiet as it's kept, we all got a level of dysfunction. I don't know no family. Look at all of the families in the Bible, that had dysfunction. Ain't no family is perfect, but we want to give that illusion that everything is okay. So the caretaker assumes that role. All right. So again, I'll say this last point again. By taking on the addict's problems, the caretaker also becomes an enabler. They enable, or they allow the person with the addiction to continue their behavior by not holding them accountable for their actions. All right. And they readily offer solutions to the addict's problems that don't include having the addict face the consequence of their addiction. Now, so that's the caretaker role. Now, what I also think is a close component of the caretaker role is the role of the hero. And here's some information on that hero role. For the family member who adopts the codependency role of hero in a family with addiction, they feel the need to make the family look good and are high achievers. So you can see how the hero and the caretaker, those roles can be similar, because part of their job and part of their goal is to make the family look good. They don't want the outside friends or outside family or co-workers or church members to think that there is anything wrong, over here. So oftentimes that caretaker and that hero, they kind of work together. I'll read something in a minute that may add a little bit more light to it. So again, the hero, they feel the need to make the family look good and are high achievers. The hero ignores the addiction problem, and they present things in a positive manner as if the roles within a family did not exist. They want to make sure that everything is okay, that everything is taken care of. The hero role in a family with addiction is usually assumed by the oldest child. So the oldest child, because they are tasked with being a responsible one and looking out for the rest of the family, that oldest child typically assumes the role of the hero, because they feel that it is their inherent job after the parents to take care of the family. So they will naturally assume the role of the hero. They want to make sure that if their parents are not able to, they want to make sure that they present the family in the most positive light that they can. All right. So the hero role in a family with addiction is usually assumed by the oldest child, and they will take on adult roles such as cooking or cleaning or other, tasks that need to be completed in the house. Now, here's what I think is also interesting. If the person with the addiction is a parent, then the hero oftentimes takes on the role of caretaker. That's why the caretaker and the hero are often aligned, because if the person with the addiction happens to be a parent, then that hero assumes the role of caretaker. So again, because both of them are concerned with making sure that the family looks good, oftentimes that hero can take on that role. While the hero seemingly, have they act together, they feel a tremendous amount of guilt and shame. And oftentimes they may develop different tendencies if they continue to assume this role. So those were just two of the roles that I wanted to kind of highlight out of the six kind of roles that dysfunctional families play when someone has an addiction. And that is the role of the caretaker and the role of hero. And again, all of these other four roles are important, but I felt those two were really good to talk about just because they have a lot of similarities. So.
Oh, good. That was some good information. And we're going to actually we are going to unfold and have greater, richer context of a discussion with the other five.
Okay.
Well, you just covered two. So the other four, we're going to talk about those later. But I want to pause and I want to see if there are any questions from our listeners. Does anybody have any questions? If you do, feel free to unmute yourself and jump on out there. Okay.
Minister Kim?
Yes.
Hi. I do have a question, and maybe, since you said we're going to be discussing this further in other sessions, but maybe in one of our sessions, we could really deal with the PTSD that those of us who are now adults are dealing with from living with, a parent or being around those with addictions as children, but we're still feeling the effects as adults.
That's good. Yeah. Eric, would you like to talk about, even if you just take the hero and the scapegoat or the caretaker, we talked about that from a child's perspective, but how does that show up in us as an adult?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think she used a great word, which is trauma, PTSD. And in a very real sense, individuals that live with parents who have dealt with an addiction, they have trauma. And we know some of, just some of the effects that trauma can bring. One of the main side effects, if you will, if I can put it like that, one of the main side effects of trauma is a lack of trust. People have a hard time trusting individuals. They can sometimes have difficulty forming what we call good interpersonal, relationships, with other people. And it really, can kind of tear at the heart of things such as safety and power and control. So with trauma, because so much control has been taken from a person when they are in a household with someone with addiction, as a result, as we get older and we become adults, we can sometimes overcompensate by now trying to exert control in other areas. So we may find ourselves being very rigid, very controlling. We operate in what in therapy, we use a fancy word called dichotomous thinking, which is just a fancy way of saying we can sometimes engage in very black and white thinking. It's either all this or all that. We do that as a protective factor because, again, it's a way that we can control things, because as a child, when a parent has an addiction, we didn't have any control over that. Things were done to us, and we had no say so. So as we get older, we say, you know what, now that I'm older and I'm in charge, I'm gonna control things. But we do that sometimes and it becomes, the pendulum swings to the other way. As a child, we had no control. As an adult, the pendulum swings and now we want to have all the control. And so therapy helps us to kind of bring that in balance. But those can be some of the things, some of the byproducts, if you will, of trauma as a child as it relates to a parent with an addiction. And it really involves engaging in therapy to kind of work through that trauma and learning how to process that trauma and really work through it so that we no longer operate, behave, think, and feel according to the trauma that we have endured earlier in life.
Oh, that's good.
That's a great question, though. Very good question. Good
Yes,
question.
it was. There's a question in the chat.
Okay.
The question is, have you noticed that church people manifest these roles differently than others?
Good question. Good question. Man, that's a good question. These are some good questions. I haven't necessarily seen them manifest them differently, but particularly I would say, that hero role, I could see where that would be maybe manifested a little stronger, right? Because think about it. Think what that hero role wants to present the family to the world in the best positive light. And so as it relates to church folk, and we all know, we children of God, saved, sanctified, filled with the Holy Ghost, shouting, speaking in tongues. We don't want nobody to know that we got these things going on, even though, again, we got, everybody got some stuff going on. But that hero, again, wants to make the family look good. And so I could see them more strongly wanting to present that perfect family to the rest of the church or to the rest of society, and really wanting to shield the family from any negative attention for a person that may have an addiction in their family. So what I would say is they may certainly engage in those, maybe those roles, maybe a little strongly, particularly that hero role, because again, that really speaks to how other people visualize and view that family.
That's
good question.
Yeah,
good question.
Great question. I have, yes.
Can I ask the question, please?
Absolutely, yes, please do.
And thank you so much for having this topic. I would like to say, if you all have noticed that when people are addicted, and addiction can be many things other than drugs.
Yes.
When they are addicted, Brother Hollie, and they become not just dealing with the addiction, but with the anger, with depression, and all that's lashed out at you, because now it's not their fault, it's your fault.
Exactly.
So how do you bring them? Because people may admit they have an addiction, but they don't want to admit a lot of times is they're angry because of the failure that they realize their life has turned into. They think that I should be in a better place, but because of the addiction, I'm where I am. So how do I get out of it? And as you said, we don't want to be enabling them, but on the same sense, you want to be stern.
Exactly. Really, really great question. And to your point, you are correct. We were kind of focusing on, or maybe indirectly, on a substance abuse addiction, but you're right. There are all types of addictions. There's addictions to drugs and alcohol. Some people have sex addiction. Some people have a gambling addiction.
Right.
There's all types of addictions. And I think it's important to keep in mind that no matter the addiction, the behaviors are the same. because again, it's a disease of the brain, and all addictions hit those pleasure centers in the brain, and it hits those receptors, particularly dopamine, or those dopamine sensors kind of go off like light bulbs, and we just get a rush whenever we're confronted with ever that addictive behavior. But you're right, because oftentimes the person with the addiction deals with a sense of shame and guilt and anger, which and really a lot of depression, because those emotions and those feelings and that behavior is hard to face. They will project that onto those that are closest to them, which oftentimes are family members, loved ones, significant others, spouses, girlfriends, wives, husbands. And so what we have to make sure that we do is reflect the behavior and hold them accountable for the behavior without internalizing the emotional manipulation that they may be trying to do. As I said earlier, individuals with an addiction are very good at emotional manipulation, and they will project, those feelings onto people that are closest to them. What we have to do as loved ones and as people on the other side, and I'm not saying this is easy, I certainly want to reiterate that these are not easy things to do, but we have to be careful that we do not internalize what they are saying, because in a lot of cases, it's the addiction that's talking, and we can internalize some of those things. So we have to try to, and it certainly is going to hurt. I mean, if people are calling us every name but a child of God, and they're cussing us out, and they're saying, I hate you, and you were never there for me, and really some things that if God doesn't help us will really sink into our psyche. We have to be careful to not allow that to kind of penetrate our spirit and continue to hold them accountable for their actions. So the way that we do that is we focus on the behaviors, we focus on the addiction, we focus on the disease rather than what they are saying, which is a byproduct of them not wanting to deal with the addiction or the disease. So we have to make a shift in our mind, because what the addict will do is they would have you latch on to the hurt and the pain and the anger out of what they are saying to you, because if you latch on to that, guess what you're not latching on to? You're not addressing the addiction. If you focus on them cutting you down and saying you were never there for them and you abandoned them and you left them, you're not focusing on the addiction and them needing to address the addiction. And so in their mind, they've won. That's exactly what they wanted to do, is shift the focus from the behavior and on to something else. So we have to maintain the focus on the addiction and not get caught up in what they are saying to us, because that's exactly what the addiction wants us to do. Focus on other things rather than the addiction. And that can be hard to do. That is not easy by any means.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you so much. That's excellent.
Yes, ma'am. My pleasure.
Amen. I would like to ask you a question, Pastor. Do you think that these roles are only specific for family members who have someone that's an addict? Can we play these roles, or do you think they're in all dysfunctional families, or is it just specific for the addict thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a really good question. These roles have kind of been studied the most, in the realm of addictions, and so there's a lot of research and literature that kind of goes into it. But if I can say, I think some of these roles may actually be adopted by individuals that, when a family member has a mental illness. I think these are very transferable to people that have a mental illness. Somebody family member that has schizophrenia, and maybe some of the, maybe the more severe, mental illnesses, or the ones that can be sometimes difficult to treat, but particularly maybe somebody that has schizophrenia, or somebody that may deal, that maybe have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and, particularly those two. But I certainly think that individuals who have family members that deal, with mental illness, some family members can adopt some of these roles, again, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to protect the family, and maybe we don't want to fully address some of those mental health issues that a person may have, so we may assume some of these roles. So I can certainly see some of these being applicable to somebody who's suffering with like a mental illness in families.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much. We try to be mindful of our time and allow ourselves an hour to come together, educate, share. I want to present just our last opportunity. Are there any other questions, comments, thoughts, even ideas of what you may want to have further discussed? Amen.
Amen.
Well, I appreciate everybody for joining us.
Really good questions, really good feedback. Yeah, that's those were good questions. I enjoyed those.
Yeah, good. And we appreciate you for taking time out of your schedule, because I know that you are seeing clients as well, and you've made some changes to accommodate us to share your wisdom and your knowledge and your experience and your expertise. So I appreciate all of that.
My pleasure.
With that being said, if we don't have any other questions.
As we say in church, if all hearts and minds are clear.
Right. Or at least at rest right now.
Right.
We're still thinking. There was a comment, abusive family members is an interesting topic as well. Absolutely.
Right. Yes. And I can right. You know what? That's an excellent comment too. I can see some of these roles. That's a really good comment. I can see some of these roles being adopted in an abusive family, because again, the same rules apply, right? We want to make sure that the family, particularly the caretaker role, the hero role, we want to present the family in the best possible light. So that's true. I can see these roles being applicable to somebody who's dealing with an abusive family member as well. Yeah, excellent point.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. Again, everyone, thank you for your comments in the chat box. Thank you so very much for setting aside time to come in, join our conversation. And we look forward to seeing you next month on the fourth Thursday at 7:30 p.m. where we'll continue our conversation about dysfunction in the family, and we'll explore more of those roles. As tonight, we've talked about the hero, and we've also spoken about the caretaker. Next month, we'll talk about two more. So I look forward to you joining us. I appreciate you. God bless you. Keep you. And until next time, I bid you a wonderful night. Be at peace, and God bless.
Amen.
Good night. Can you stay on?
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you all.
Thank you. Very good.
Thank you. Hang tight for me, Mr. Eric.
Okay.
We got Pastor Niche. Thank you, Minister Kim. Thank you. So
That was really good.
very
Amen.
much.
Amen.